There exists a profound paradox in human experience that reveals itself when we examine the nature of time and consciousness. We find ourselves caught in a peculiar situation where attempting to stay on the surface causes us to sink, yet when we try to dive deep, we somehow find ourselves floating. When we hold our breath in fear, we lose the very air we seek to preserve. This contradiction points to an ancient wisdom that has been largely forgotten in our modern world. The human mind has developed an extraordinary capacity to remember the past and anticipate the future. This ability to sequence events, to learn from experience, and to plan ahead represents perhaps the greatest achievement of human consciousness. It is what allows us to survive, adapt, and create civilizations. Yet this same magnificent capacity, when misused, becomes our greatest source of suffering and alienation from life itself. Consider how we actually experience time in our daily lives. For most people, the past and future feel more real and compelling than the present moment. We live as though the present were merely a thin line dividing the all-powerful past from the crucially important future. Our consciousness becomes almost entirely occupied with memories and expectations, leaving little room for direct awareness of what is actually happening right now. This creates a strange situation where we can never quite seem to catch up with our own lives. We are always either rehashing what has already happened or preparing for what might happen next. The actual living of life, which can only occur in the present moment, becomes secondary to our mental commentary about life. We become like people so busy studying a map that we never actually see the landscape we are traveling through. The irony becomes apparent when we realize that all experience, whether it be memory of the past or anticipation of the future, actually occurs in the present moment. There is literally no other time in which any experience can take place. Even when we remember something from years ago, that remembering is happening now. When we worry about tomorrow, that worrying is a present moment activity. Yet somehow we have learned to use our present moment awareness to escape from the present moment itself. This escape from the present creates a fundamental disconnection from reality. We begin to live in a world of concepts and symbols rather than direct experience. We become like people who mistake the menu for the meal, the map for the territory, the description of water for the actual experience of wetness. This conceptual living becomes so habitual that we forget there is any other way to experience existence. Modern technology has amplified this tendency to live outside the present moment. We exist in a frenetic world that seems designed to pull our attention in every direction, except toward what is immediately before us. We carry devices that constantly interrupt us with information about things happening elsewhere, people we are not with, and events that have not yet occurred or have already passed. This creates a kind of chronic fragmentation of attention that makes sustained present moment awareness increasingly difficult. The biological rhythms that once connected us to natural cycles of day and night seasons and organic time have been replaced by the artificial rhythms of mechanical time. We schedule our lives according to abstract units of measurement rather than the natural flow of energy and attention. This creates a violence to our natural being that keeps us in a constant state of subtle stress and disconnection. Yet the solution to this predicament is not to reject thinking, planning, or memory altogether. The human brain, including its capacities for calculation and reasoning, is as natural as the heart or stomach. When used appropriately, it serves life beautifully. The problem arises when we begin to serve the brain rather than having the brain serve us. When thinking becomes compulsive rather than voluntary, when we cannot stop the constant mental commentary, even when it serves no useful purpose, then the tool has become the master. The brain functions best when it is relaxed and natural like any other organ of the body. We do not have to strain and effort to digest food or to hear sounds or to see colors. Similarly, when the mind is functioning naturally, thinking happens effortlessly and spontaneously when needed and stops when not needed. But most people approach mental activity as though they were trying to lift heavy objects, scrunching up their faces and creating unnecessary tension. This effort and strain actually interferes with clear thinking, just as trying too hard to remember something often prevents the memory from arising naturally. The mind works best when it is alert, but relaxed, focused, but not tense. This natural state of awareness allows us to respond freshly to each situation, rather than reacting from old patterns and conditioned responses. The key insight is that consciousness itself is naturally present moment-oriented. It is only when we use consciousness to create mental movies about the past and future that we lose touch with immediate reality. Consciousness, in its natural state, is like a clear mirror that reflects whatever appears before it without distortion. It does not hold on to previous reflections or anticipate future ones. It simply mirrors what is present with complete clarity and openness. This natural mirroring quality of consciousness reveals something profound about the nature of experience itself. When we examine our actual experience carefully, we discover that there is no separate self standing apart from experience observing it from the outside. There is simply experience itself, arising and passing away moment by moment. The sense of being a separate observer of experience is itself just another experience arising in consciousness. This recognition dissolves the artificial division between the experiencer and the experienced, the subject and the object, the self and the world. What remains is simply the flow of experience itself, undivided and immediate. This is not a philosophical theory, but a direct recognition that can be verified through careful attention to one's actual experience right now. When this artificial division dissolves, many of our psychological problems dissolve with it. The anxiety about the future and regret about the past are based on the illusion that there is a separate self that needs to be protected or improved. When we see that this separate self is just a mental construction, a story we tell ourselves, then we can relax into the natural flow of life without the constant effort to maintain and defend an imaginary entity. This does not mean becoming passive or irresponsible. Action continues to arise naturally when needed, but it comes from presence rather than from psychological compulsion. Decisions are made with clarity rather than from fear or desire. We respond to situations directly rather than reacting from conditioned patterns. Life becomes spontaneous and creative rather than mechanical and repetitive. The recognition of our essential unity with experience also reveals that we are not separate from the natural world around us. The boundary between self and environment is seen to be conceptual rather than actual. We are not isolated beings struggling to survive in a hostile world, but expressions of the same natural intelligence that moves the planets and grows the trees. This understanding brings a profound sense of belonging and ease. From this perspective, problems are no longer seen as obstacles to be overcome, but as movements within the natural flow of existence. Pain and pleasure, success and failure, birth and death are all recognized as equally valid expressions of the one life that we are. This does not mean becoming indifferent to these experiences, but rather meeting them with complete openness rather than resistance. The practice of present moment awareness is not a technique or method in the usual sense. It is more like remembering something we have always known but somehow forgotten. It requires no special training or preparation, only the willingness to stop running away from our immediate experience and to pay attention to what is actually happening right now. This attention needs to be gentle and natural, like the way we might listen to music or watch a sunset. It is not a matter of concentrating or focusing in a strained way, but rather of relaxing into a state of open receptivity. We simply allow whatever is arising in our experience, to be there without trying to change it or figure it out or get rid of it. In this simple allowing, we discover that our experience is far richer and more mysterious than we had imagined. Ordinary activities, like eating, walking, or breathing, reveal unexpected depths when experienced with full attention. The world becomes vivid and alive in a way that no amount of thinking about it could ever capture. Colors seem brighter, sounds clearer, physical sensations more immediate and present. This enhanced aliveness is not a special state that we achieve through effort, but rather our natural condition when we stop interfering with our own experience through mental commentary and resistance. It's like removing dark glasses and suddenly seeing how bright the world actually is. The brightness was always there, we simply were not aware of it because of the filters we had placed between ourselves and immediate experience. The beauty of this recognition is that it requires no special circumstances or conditions. It can happen anywhere, at any time, in any situation. Whether we are stuck in traffic, sitting in a meeting, or walking in nature, the opportunity for present moment awareness is always available. We need only remember to drop our mental commentary and open to what is actually here. This is perhaps the most radical teaching of all, that ordinary life, exactly as it is right now, is already perfect and complete. We do not need to go anywhere else, or become someone different, or achieve any special state of consciousness. The miracle we are seeking is already present in this very moment, in this very experience, in this very breath. We need only recognize what has always been here. The recognition of the perfection of this moment does not mean that circumstances cannot or should not change. Growth, learning, and improvement continue to happen naturally, but they arise from acceptance of what is rather than from resistance to what is. Change that comes from presence is effortless and sustainable, like the way a plant naturally grows toward the light. When we truly understand that life can only be lived in the present moment, our entire relationship to existence shifts. We stop postponing our happiness, waiting for better circumstances or future achievements. We stop living in the gap between what is and what we think should be. We discover that fulfillment is not a goal to be achieved, but our natural state when we stop seeking it elsewhere. This does not mean abandoning all goals or becoming inactive. Plans can still be made and projects undertaken, but from a place of presence rather than compulsion. We engage with future possibilities while remaining rooted in present reality. We learn from the past without being imprisoned by it. We become like skilled surfers who can ride the waves of change while maintaining their balance and grace. The ultimate message is breathtakingly simple. Be completely present to what you are doing right now. Whether you are reading these words, listening to sounds around you, or feeling the sensations in your body, give yourself totally to that experience. Do not hold anything back. Do not divide your attention between what is happening and your thoughts about what is happening. Let this moment be everything you are and everything you know. In this complete commitment to the present moment, all seeking ends and true living begins. The search for meaning, purpose, and fulfillment is revealed to have been unnecessary because meaning, purpose, and fulfillment are the natural qualities of undivided presence. When we stop running toward some imaginary future happiness and fully arrive in this moment, we discover that we have been carrying the treasure we were seeking all along. This is the secret that has been hidden in plain sight throughout all spiritual and philosophical traditions. It cannot be grasped intellectually because it is not a concept but a lived reality. It cannot be achieved through effort because it is already here. It can only be recognized through the simple act of stopping our mental activity long enough to notice what has always been present. The invitation is always the same: stop right now and simply be aware. Notice what is actually happening in your Direct experience without labeling it or analyzing it or trying to change it. Let yourself be surprised by the richness and immediacy of this very moment. Discover that the life you have been seeking is the life you are already living, and the consciousness you have been trying to develop is the consciousness you already are. Yet even as we speak of present moment awareness, we must be careful not to turn it into another goal to be achieved or technique to be mastered. The very idea of practicing presence can become another form of mental activity that takes us away from the simple immediacy of what is actually happening. True presence is not something we do, but something we allow. It is not an achievement, but a recognition of what is already naturally occurring when we stop interfering with our own experience. This interference usually takes the form of mental commentary about our experience. We have learned to live with a constant internal narrator that tells us what is happening, evaluates whether it is good or bad, compares it to past experiences, and makes predictions about what might happen next. This narrator becomes so habitual that we mistake it for consciousness itself. We think that being conscious means having thoughts about our experience, rather than simply having the experience directly. But thoughts are just another form of experience arising in the field of awareness. They are not separate from awareness, nor are they the source of awareness. Awareness is the open space in which all experiences arise and pass away, including thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, and memories. When we recognize this, we can begin to relate to our thoughts differently. Instead of being caught up in the content of thoughts, we can appreciate them as temporary movements in the vast space of consciousness. This shift in perspective has profound implications for how we live our daily lives. Most of our psychological suffering comes from being identified with our thoughts and taking them to be absolutely true. We suffer not because of what is actually happening, but because of our thoughts about what is happening. When we see that thoughts are just mental events arising and passing away, like clouds in the sky, we can maintain our peace and clarity even in challenging circumstances. The same principle applies to emotions. We often think we are our emotions, saying things like, "I am angry" or "I am sad," as though anger or sadness defined our entire being. But when we pay careful attention, we discover that emotions are temporary, energetic movements in the body and mind. They arise, reach a peak, and naturally subside if we do not resist them or try to perpetuate them through mental elaboration. The awareness in which emotions arise remains unchanged by their coming and going. This understanding allows us to have a completely different relationship with difficult emotions. Instead of trying to avoid them or fix them or analyze them, we can simply allow them to be present and run their natural course. We discover that emotions, even painful ones, are not problems to be solved, but natural expressions of our aliveness that contain their own intelligence and movement toward resolution. The same spacious awareness that holds our thoughts and emotions also holds our entire life experience. Birth and death, health and illness, success and failure, love and loss, all arise within this same undifferentiated field of consciousness. From this perspective, nothing that happens in life is ultimately a problem, because everything is equally an expression of the same fundamental reality. This does not mean we become indifferent to the relative experiences of pleasure and pain, but rather that we hold them all within a larger context of understanding and acceptance. This expanded perspective naturally gives rise to what we might call wisdom. Wisdom is not accumulated knowledge or clever thinking, but rather the natural intelligence that emerges when we are fully present and not caught up in our mental constructions about reality. This wisdom knows how to respond appropriately to each situation without needing to consult past experience or predetermined rules. It is like the intelligence of the body that knows how to heal a wound or digest food, without any conscious direction from us. When we trust this natural wisdom, life becomes effortless in a profound way. We stop trying to force outcomes through willpower and instead learn to cooperate with the natural flow of circumstances. We make decisions not through anxious deliberation, but through a kind of intuitive knowing that emerges from deep stillness and presence. We act when action is called for and remain still when stillness is appropriate, like water that naturally finds its way around obstacles. This is not a passive or fatalistic approach to life, but rather the most skillful and effective way of engaging with existence. When our actions arise from presence rather than compulsion, they tend to be more appropriate, more creative, and more successful in the deepest sense. We stop working against ourselves and the natural order and begin to cooperate with the intelligence that is always available when we are truly present. The cultivation of this kind of presence requires what we might call a fundamental reorientation of our values and priorities. Instead of constantly seeking more experiences, achievements, or possessions, we begin to appreciate the depth and richness that is available in ordinary experience when met with full attention. We discover that a simple cup of coffee drunk with complete presence can be more satisfying than elaborate entertainment consumed while distracted. This shift in values naturally leads to a simpler and more sustainable way of living. When we are truly present, we need less external stimulation and distraction to feel fulfilled. We become more sensitive to what genuinely nourishes us and less compulsive about pursuing things that promise satisfaction, but ultimately leave us feeling empty. We begin to distinguish between our authentic needs and our conditioned desires. The environmental crisis that faces our planet is largely a result of this confusion between needs and desires, between what truly fulfills us and what we have been conditioned to want. When human beings are disconnected from present moment awareness, they tend to consume compulsively, always seeking the next experience or acquisition that will finally bring satisfaction. But satisfaction cannot be found in the future because it is only available now in the quality of our present moment awareness. A culture based on present moment awareness would necessarily be more sustainable and harmonious because it would be based on actual fulfillment rather than the perpetual seeking that drives our current economic and social systems. People who are truly present tend to be naturally generous and cooperative because they do not experience themselves as separate from others or from the natural world. They act from wholeness rather than from a sense of lack or fear. This is perhaps why wisdom traditions throughout history have emphasized the cultivation of present moment awareness as the foundation of both individual awakening and social harmony. When human beings remember their essential nature as consciousness itself, they naturally act with compassion and wisdom. They no longer need to be controlled through external rules and regulations because they are aligned with the deeper intelligence that governs all natural systems. The practice of present moment awareness is therefore not just a personal, spiritual practice, but a contribution to the healing and evolution of human consciousness as a whole. Every moment of authentic presence adds to the collective awakening of our species. Every time someone stops the compulsive movement of mind and returns to simple awareness, they are helping to tip the balance toward a more conscious and sustainable way of being on this planet. Yet this understanding must not become another burden or responsibility that we carry in our minds. The transformation of consciousness cannot be forced or hurried. It happens naturally when we create the conditions that allow our natural wisdom and compassion to emerge. These conditions are surprisingly simple: stillness, openness, and attention to what is actually here, rather than what we think should be here. The miracle is that these conditions are always available regardless of our external circumstances. Whether we are in the midst of great success or apparent failure, in sickness or health alone, or in company, the opportunity for present moment awareness remains constant. We need only remember to stop our mental commentary long enough to recognize the awareness that is always already here. This recognition is not a one-time event, but rather an ongoing rediscovery that deepens with time and attention. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to awaken from the trance of mental distraction and return to the vivid immediacy of direct experience. Like learning to play a musical instrument, the development of present moment awareness requires patience and gentle persistence rather than forced effort. The obstacles to this development are not external, but internal. They consist mainly of our habitual patterns of thinking and reacting that keep us locked into familiar but limited ways of experiencing life. These patterns were formed over many years and cannot be changed overnight, but they can be gradually dissolved through the patient application of awareness and acceptance. The key is to approach these patterns with curiosity rather than judgment, with compassion rather than criticism. When we notice that our mind has wandered into fantasy about the future or rumination about the past, we can simply acknowledge this without making it into a problem. We can gently redirect our attention to the present moment without any sense of failure or frustration. This gentle approach is crucial because self-criticism and forcing actually reinforce the very patterns we are trying to dissolve. The mind that judges our lack of presence is itself absent, caught up in concepts about how we should be, rather than accepting how we actually are. True transformation happens through loving acceptance of what is, including our tendency to be absent and distracted. As this acceptance deepens, we begin to discover that there is actually no one who is present or absent, no one who succeeds or fails at being mindful. There is simply the flow of experience itself, sometimes including the experience of being present, and sometimes including the experience of being lost in thought. When we see that both presence and absence are movements within the same field of awareness, we can relax the whole project of trying to be more present and simply appreciate whatever is actually happening. This may sound like a contradiction, but it points to the deepest understanding of present moment awareness. True presence is not a mental state that comes and goes, but the unchanging awareness in which all mental states arise and pass away. We cannot achieve this awareness because we already are this awareness. We can only recognize what has always been true and stop pretending to be something limited and separate. When this recognition stabilizes, life becomes effortless in the most profound sense. We stop fighting against ourselves and reality and begin to flow with the natural movement of existence. We discover that what we took to be problems were actually the natural play of consciousness, appearing and disappearing like waves on the ocean of being. We realize that we have never been separate from the source of all existence and therefore have nothing to fear and nothing to achieve. This understanding brings a profound sense of coming home to ourselves and to life itself. We no longer feel like strangers in a foreign world, but recognize ourselves as expressions of the same intelligence that moves the stars and seasons. We see that our individual life is not separate from the universal life, but is one of its countless, unique manifestations, precious and meaningful, not because it will last forever, but because it is happening now. The fear of death that haunts so much of human existence dissolves when we realize that what we truly are has never been born and will never die. The awareness in which our life appears is the same awareness that was present before our birth and will remain after our death. Individual experiences come and go, but the experiencing itself is eternal and unchanging. When we identify with this eternal aspect of ourselves rather than with the temporary content of our experience, we find the peace and freedom that everyone is seeking. This peace is not a blank emptiness, but a fullness that contains all possibilities. It is the creative source from which all experiences arise and to which they return. When we rest in this source, we become available to life in ways we never imagined possible. We can respond to each moment with fresh creativity rather than conditioned reactivity. We can love without attachment and act without grasping for results. The beauty of this understanding is that it transforms not only our inner experience, but also our relationships with others and with the world around us. When we see that the same awareness that we are is also the true nature of everyone, and everything else separation becomes impossible. We begin to treat others as we would treat ourselves because we recognize that at the deepest level there is no other. Compassion becomes as natural as breathing because suffering anywhere is recognized as suffering everywhere. This universal compassion is not sentimental or emotional, but clear and practical. It leads to actions that are truly helpful rather than merely well-intentioned. Because it is based on understanding rather than feelings, it can remain steady even in difficult circumstances. It responds to what is actually needed rather than what we think should be needed based on our own projections and assumptions. The world we inhabit is in desperate need of this kind of clarity and compassion. The crises we face as a species, from environmental destruction to social inequality to political division, all stem from the fundamental misunderstanding of who and what we are. When human beings mistake themselves for separate entities competing for limited resources, conflict and suffering are inevitable. But when we recognize our essential unity, cooperation, and harmony become natural. This recognition cannot be imposed from the outside through education or legislation, though these may have their place. It must arise from within through the direct discovery of our own true nature. This is why the cultivation of present-moment awareness is not a luxury or self-indulgence, but an urgent necessity for the survival and thriving of life on Earth. The future of our planet depends on enough human beings awakening from the dream of separation and remembering who they really are. Yet this awakening cannot be forced or rushed. It happens in its own time and way for each individual. Our only task is to create the conditions that allow this natural awakening to occur. These conditions are created through the practice of presence acceptance and loving awareness in each moment of our daily lives. Every time we choose presence over distraction, acceptance over resistance, love over fear, we are contributing to the awakening of consciousness on our planet. The transformation of the world begins with the transformation of our own consciousness. And the transformation of consciousness begins with the simple recognition of what is already present right here and now. This moment contains everything we have ever sought and everything we could ever need. When we truly understand this, seeking ends and living begins. The sacred reveals itself to be hidden not in some distant realm, but in the ordinary miracle of present experience. Heaven is not a place we go to, but a recognition of where we have always been.